граждане и гражданки Советского Союза. Сегодня, в 4 часа утра, германские войска напали на нашу страну, атаковали наши границы во многих местах.
Hello everyone, this is Showtime 112. Let's get one thing clear. Soviet pilots who attempted and often succeeded in bringing down German aircraft by deliberately colliding with them are not the same as Japanese kamikaze. While the ultimate sacrifice for the homeland was often pointed out, in most cases the pilots still hoped to survive the collision. This method brought down a relatively small number of enemy airplanes, between 270 and 500 depending on the source, but it nevertheless resulted in a particular fascination and attention within the Soviet Union and Russia more recently. Aerial ramming included attacks on enemy aircraft, ground and naval targets, but in this video we will focus on the air-to-air part. Why would you even consider ramming an enemy aircraft instead of shooting it with your guns? And why wouldn't you call other fighters to help? To answer these questions, we need to consider the circumstances under which most of these aerial rammings took place. Soviet pilots were not the first ever to employ ramming in an attempt to down an enemy aircraft. There are such accounts from World War I, and the Polish colonel Leopold Pamula is believed to have performed the first ramming attack against a German airplane on the first day of World War II. But Tarans, as they are called in Russian language, appeared very early in the German invasion of the USSR. Some Western authors attribute these tactics to poor training of Soviet pilots, making it an equivalent of a ground human wave attack. Soviet sources viewed it more as a demonstration of profound love for the homeland and the Communist Party, which also reflected the early war mindset of heroic sacrifice. Although Soviet pilots in the early phase of the war were generally not well trained, it was not the main factor behind Taran attacks. This usually wasn't some clumsy suicidal attack, but rather a delicate maneuver. There were generally 3 types of Taran. 1. Pilot would try to damage the enemy's control surfaces with his propeller. 2. He would try to use his wing to push the opponent's aircraft out of control, similar to what RAF pilots used against V-1s. 3. Pilot would perform a direct crash into the main body of the enemy airplane, and this would almost certainly mean no survival for the attacker. In the first 2 cases, the pilot who performed the Taran still had reasonable chance of landing back with his plane in the best case, or bail out if landing wasn't possible. The quantity, type and condition of German airplanes determined what method Soviet pilots would use for Taran attacks. If the enemy was in good condition, with gunners shooting back and flying in a formation where other planes would provide support, the first 2 methods would have been very difficult to perform. This leads us to the next point. Although there are numerous accounts of Soviet pilots ramming German fighters, in the majority of cases the victim was a bomber, and even more precisely, a lone bomber. Why would these bombers fly alone, and why would they often be intercepted by lone Soviet fighters? In the early days of the German invasion, Luftwaffe enjoyed air superiority. Luftwaffe felt confident enough to send the bombers in small groups with no escorts. Also, many bombers were assigned to reconnaissance tasks. This was a critical activity with the rapidly moving front lines in vast areas of the country. No less than 25% of Luftwaffe's assets were committed to this task in the opening phase of the war against the USSR. These recon airplanes would usually fly alone along highways or railroads. Soviet airplanes would patrol over these routes, but even they couldn't cover them with a large number of fighters. Most of them had no radio, and they could easily separate from their formation without an ability to coordinate a rejoin. So, we come to the most common Taran scenario: a single Soviet fighter attacking a single German bomber. Once a Soviet fighter discovered the German bomber, the pilot would naturally try to shoot it down. But often he couldn't achieve it. Apart from inadequate training and primitive gun sights, the main reason for this was limited firepower of Soviet fighters. Soviets operated large numbers of outdated fighters such as I-153 biplane or I-16. And some more modern fighters such as MiG-3 had even less firepower than some of the older types. This early Mikoyan and Gurevich design carried only one 12.7mm and two 7.62mm machine guns. Along with other modern designs such as Lag-3 and Yak-1, it was plagued with bad engines, and to achieve high speeds it needed to be light, which in turn meant limited firepower. A Soviet pilot attacking even a single German bomber could easily find himself out of ammo without shooting down the enemy. With no radio to call friendly fighters, and with a strong idea of the need for personal sacrifice instilled in their minds, many of them would resort to Taran. While there is no perfect certainty as to who performed the first Taran in the German invasion of the USSR, several sources list Senior Lieutenant Ivan Ivanov, a deputy squadron commander of the 46th Fighter Aviation Regiment. On the first day of the invasion, June 22nd, Ivanov took off at dawn from his airfield Mlinov near the city of Dubno. He led a flight of I-16s, or I-153s according to some sources, and they soon discovered a group of 6 Heinkel 111s. They managed to shoot down one of the Heinkels, and the others reportedly aborted their attacks. Ivanov's wingman landed as they were low on fuel. As Ivanov was about to land himself, another Heinkel 111 appeared, and he aborted the landing and attacked the intruder instead. He soon ran out of ammo, and with his low fuel state, he decided to ram the enemy bomber. He succeeded and the Heinkel crashed, killing the entire crew. Ivanov was too low to bail out, and he died as well. He was posthumously awarded the title of Hero of the Soviet Union. Russian sources quote more Tarans performed on the very first day of the invasion, and the practice continued. These early cases were not the result of any encouragement by the authorities, but rather individual pilot decisions. But soon, these tactics would receive official support, and Taran was presented as an act of a true patriot. Exchanging one, often outdated Soviet fighter for a modern German bomber was considered a good deal. But by 1944, Taran was officially discouraged. The situation had changed since the early days of the war. Luftwaffe no longer had air superiority, and necessity for Taran was reduced. Luftwaffe would now send their bombers in large groups, escorted by fighters. Chances for a successful Taran were now very low. Soviet fighters now mostly carried radio transmitters, which enabled a much better coordination and control system. Even though Soviet pilots used the ramming tactic more often than those of other nations, we have accounts of pilots from almost all the involved countries performing such acts. Even Germans eventually resorted to ramming Allied bombers in the final days of the war, but that is a story for another video. If you like this one, be sure to press the like button. Become a Patreon supporter to ensure the future of the channel, join our Discord, and keep watching Showtime 112.